trips to the left. Staley's the innermost. Lounsbury back to throw. Over the middle, he's picked off again. This is Stern at the 42-yard line. He gets by Staley. 10-5 touchdown. Gabe Stern with another pick six for the Bobcats from 42 yards out. And Caleb Lounsbury might have been zeroing in on somebody. Stern reading the eyes all the way.
Snap to Richmond. Pocket slowly closing, gets it to Moshe. Moshe Richmond trying to breaks more tackles. Three tackles broken in pursuit is Corey Boltzmann. Touchdown, Moshe Richmond.
What a play there. Jukin all over the place. Breaks three tackles.
That was a great play. Showing off his athleticism. 37 yards.
St. Clair is going to take the snap, give it to Myers. Myers is going to dance his way through the hole, and he breaks a few tackles and in for a Wildcat touchdown. 22-yard run for Aiden Myers and puts the Cats on top.
There's that start and stop ability that Aiden has that is definitely a game changer in another level. Went left, juked back right.
Had two guys he was dragging, kind of broke free from them and dove into the end zone.
How about that? We have a theme song.
Every week gets a little bit sharper because we got to be at our best before playoffs start.
We do.
We have to be at our best, just like the players out there have to.
Absolutely. Welcome. It is episode 6 of Inside the 605. Your ticket to everything South Dakota high school football. That's the Janny Man, Jason Andera. I'm David Brown. We got a lot of new things. We have the wheel in, its 4th different place in 6 episodes. Again, tinkering. We just try and do, football teams, it's their 1/11th. We try and do our 1/2.
A lot of film study this week.
Yep.
We're getting there, but we're going to be a second half riser, just like the second half risers we're going to talk about on the show. The teams that I think have a chance to ascend in the second half of the season.
Yes, we are at essentially the midway point of the regular season in South Dakota, give or take. And so for all 7 classes, after we spin the wheel, Jason will give his 7 second half risers, 1 in each class. So stay tuned for that.
Let's talk about a few teams that we haven't talked about much this year so far. So, yeah, check it out.
But, of course, we have to start with some dessert, more brownie points. Let's give them out. And the focus is going to be very similar to what it was last week. We're going to start 11 AA because we have to start with the Brookings Bobcats, the undefeated Brookings Bobcats. 13-0 win over Pierre. That's a story in and of itself, but just a dominant defense. They've allowed 7 points all season. 13-0. Their 2 touchdowns came on pick sixes, one by Jay Harris, one by Gabe Stern. And defense travels, Jason. Now, let's be frank. The offense, and I think even head coach Brady Clark will admit, the offense needs to figure some stuff out. They're not going to blow anyone's doors off, and they need to figure out what works for them on offense. But defense travels, and this is a very interesting team that has completely flipped the script from last season.
How about a 2-score win last week without scoring an offensive touchdown? That shows you what the defense has done. And it's been Charlie Bisgard, 3 picks this year so far. Bergen Tetzloff has been unbelievable, and he's really risen up not only as a great defensive player, but as a leader on this team. And Blake Canigator, also 3 sacks. They've gotten 3 defensive touchdowns this year, and they're allowing 2.2 yards per carry on the defensive side of the ball. That's amazing.
Now, Brookings had a couple blowout wins to start the season. They've already scored more points halfway through this season than they did all of last season. I didn't realize until I looked at it, in Brookings' 9 games last year, they were shut out 7 times in those 9 games. It it was an ugly year by all accounts, and so good for Brady Clark, good for Brookings turning something around. It speaks to the general parity in 11AA in general, but for Brookings specifically, if they can find some semblance of an offense in the second half, they will be a legitimate threat.
Even after the 4-0 start, they're already the comeback team of the year for sure in this class. But they have a chance to do some really special stuff. They've got a tougher schedule. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the Class 11 AA stuff. But this is a team that is definitely banking on the defense and needs to find some more offense to be a title contender.
Yeah, every AA team plays a AAA team at some point during the season. That's what Brookings is going to have next week. They are coming to Sioux Falls Howard Wood Field to take on Sioux Falls Roosevelt. That's going to be an interesting game. We're going to break that down a little bit later. But of course, we have to talk about my second brownie point. You know, brownies sometimes get stale after a week. No, this is a fresh brownie, a fresh perspective on an old point. The parity in 11AA. So you get to look at the records right now, but this is almost circuitous, not quite, but Watertown and Brookings have beat Pierre. Pierre beat Aberdeen Central. Aberdeen Central beat Spearfish this week. Spearfish beat T week 1. Watertown still has not lost to a AA team. Yankton at 2-2 is still dangerous. So you have 7 teams still that have an argument, and they're beating up on each other right now.
And even these teams outside that top 7, Huron and Sturgis, they played a great game last week, a 1-point game. So anytime you have these teams going against each other, you literally have no idea what's going to happen. And I think these teams are all putting themselves in position where they know they've got to win close games down the stretch and find ways to pull some games out, because they're all winnable from here on out for every team in that class.
Absolutely, they are. We'll get to the top 5 poll a little bit later when we discuss AA in more context, but the team receiving the most votes, a.k.a. the 6th place team, that's T. They're 3-1 right now.
Yeah.
The 7th place team is Aberdeen Central, who's 1-3, but they just beat Spearfish. 2 of their other 3 games were close against some of those top contenders. The larger context is this. Pierre obviously being the 7-time champions, it's not that Pierre's not a formality anymore. The championship matchup's not a formality anymore. The semifinals are not a formality anymore.
Quarterfinals aren't.
Quarterfinals aren't a formality anymore. I think it's really cool just to see 7 teams right now have a legitimate argument. I mean, we get to the playoffs, that 2-7 matchup's going to be insane.
You know, just over, 10 years ago, they switched to an extra class of football, and this is what they were hoping for, to have a competitive class of football for these teams that were in the ESD for the most part, and they're getting it this year. This is like NFL football. It's parity all over the field.
AA is going to be a lot of fun coming down the stretch. Third and final brownie point this week. We're going to channel our inner Dennis Greens. Sioux Falls Christian, they are who we thought they were. Not even a question on who was the better team between them and Canton. Just an absolute clinic by the Chargers on Friday.
4 plays into the game, they had scored 3 touchdowns offensively. That's getting it done right off the bat for Sioux Falls Christian. We're going to talk about some of their top performers last week. They were as sharp as they possibly could be, and maybe we're not talking about them enough, and we're talking about them a lot. This is a really special team. They need to stay healthy, obviously, but they've got a shot to do something special in 11A.
They got bunch of skill guys on offense. They have lines, led by Lincoln Semchenko. Those lines are fantastic on the offensive and defensive sides. And, of course, defensively, they're incredibly stout. You mentioned we'll get into a couple of the specifics later, but how about this? For the first time, Sioux Falls Christian, the unanimous number 1 in the polls this week after we had kind of chided the other media members for not voting them number 1.
Well, and I hate to go back to the very first episode, but I said,
please go back.
I said it was going to be Sioux Falls Christian and
Check
Lennox.
the tape.
And Lennox as the 2 teams. And finally, I see those 2 teams at the top of the class. Now, for every time I am right on this, I am obviously wrong at least one time. But when I get them right, it feels good. But those 2 teams do feel like the teams with the most potential, the most upside. Although, when we get into 11A, we'll talk about some of those contenders that could give those teams some problems.
But 49-7 was your final Sioux Falls Christian over Canton in the 1-2 matchup. Those are your brownie points for the week. Remember, you can ask Jandy anything. You can comment. We are live on YouTube, liveticket.tv, 605 Sports. Ask Jandy anything about football, about life, about his favorite Sioux Falls restaurants.
Next time I'm going to get a haircut. It's been a while.
Next time he's going to get a haircut so you can stalk him and find out where he's getting his haircut. Where do you get your haircut?
Hey, I'm not going to tell you.
Oh, well,
wait till somebody asks.
That ruins the fun. All right, we're going to wait till someone
Maybe
asks.
Great Clips. I don't know.
Maybe Great Clips. Huh, very nice. But all right, you mentioned it. You teased it a little bit earlier. We got a lot of good top performers this week in 11 and 9-man. Let's break them all down.
So I broke them down by 9-man top performers and 11-man top performers this week. So in 9-man football, we had a heck of a game between Centerville and Del Rapids St. Mary. And in that game, we had some shooters in the shootout. And it's Alec Austin once again on our list, going over 400 yards with 5 passing touchdowns. And then he found his favorite receiver, Miles Eide, 14 times for 215, and he caught 4 of those touchdowns. So I had to put both those guys on the list. They did lose that game by 2 points, but what a performance by the Tornadoes.
Absolutely. A 46-44 shootout. We had talked about the Centerville offense being something special, and even in a loss, they proved it.
They did. How about Gayville Vollen has a couple of guys on the list, beating Irene Wakanda 56-20, and they did it with their junior running back or receiver, Carter Barron, 9 catches, 170 yards and a touchdown. He also ran one in. And then Spencer Carsons, the senior quarterback, was nearly perfect. A big game for him, going over 200 passing, over 100 rushing. So congratulations to those 2 Raiders. Let's go down the list to Lincoln LeBrun of Del Rapids St. Mary. He's had some big games this year, but none as big as this one. 25 rushes, 275, and 3 touchdowns. He did it on both sides of the ball and netted them that 2-point win over a team that's a class above them.
Absolutely. Lincoln LeBrun, as you mentioned, has kind of been one of those consistent performers, but you look at those numbers, 275 yards, 3 touchdowns. One of the big reasons why Del Rapids St. Mary's is one of the best teams in 9-man.
Yeah, and I've had some nominations for him to be on this list, and he's been really close, but this time he punches the ticket with the 275. How about Aiden Myers? This guy hasn't been close. He's been on the list almost every week.
Back-to-back weeks,
and he
for
does
sure.
it again. 22 carries, 244, 3 touchdowns. Big week for them as they shut out Bonham 26-0. And then Gavin Nicholson of Loyola Frederick played his biggest game of the year in their biggest matchup of the year. A huge win for them as a team, but look what he did. 210 on the ground, 3 touchdowns, and 15 tackles on the defensive side.
That is a complete effort, if I do say so myself, and a good win for them over a Faulkton team that's really good.
That was a challenge. Loyola Frederick came in undefeated, but they were playing a ranked team in 9B. Found a way to get it done. Not only get it done, but pretty handily, 42-20. Let's go to the 11-man game changers, I should say. And we're going to start with Josiah Hines, the junior running back. He's had some huge games this year, but this one was one of the most, I don't know,
special,
pretty to watch, because he was not only powerful, but he was fast. 26 rushes, 259, and 4 touchdowns. They've been passing the ball well over the last couple of weeks, but this time showed they can do it on the ground.
49-14 over Yankton. It was a tight game early on, then Harrisburg kept on running away from them.
Exactly, and that was because of Josiah Hines. How about a couple of Rapid City Christian Comets? Simon Kiefer, 14-24 for 256. He got 3 through the air, 1 on the ground, but Wesley Schlebach really stole the show for them. 6 catches, 112, 2 touchdowns through the air, 2 on the ground, and dominated on defense. He's been one of their leading tacklers all season long, and he's made some pretty acrobatic catches in that game as well. So not only just putting up the numbers, but doing it in style.
Absolutely. 46-6 victory for Rapid City Christian over Chamberlain. Congrats to the Comets. First win in 11A.
All right, let's move on to Josh Myers, and he's, you look at it, 126 and 3 touchdowns. I mean, that's a good day, but it's not usually a game changers day, but only on 13 carries, and it was so clutch in that game when they played Jefferson and needed the big first downs. Josh Myers came up huge, and that's a team that can stop the run in Jefferson, so big shout out. Doing that against the top 5 team.
Absolutely. Lincoln, we'll get into it in a little bit later, but Brody Schaefer, probably maybe his worst game, quote unquote, as the Lincoln quarterback, had barely over 100 yards passing. But when you got a kid like Myers on the ground who can diversify that offense, that proved to be the difference in what was a closer than the final score indicates game against Jefferson.
For sure. And Sullivan Schlemgen, he might be, all said and done, one of the best players in high school football. And he does it on both sides of the ball. Usually in 9-man, we see the guys who are getting the tackles and the interceptions and the tackles for loss and the catches and the run and a little bit of everything. Well, he plays like a 9-man player. 7 catches, 196, 2 touchdowns. He also ran the ball 5 times. He lined up at quarterback several times. a touchdown on the ground, 7 tackles, including a tackle for loss. Sullivan Schlimgen continues to really be the focal point of O'Gorman and still put up those big numbers.
46-7 over Rapid City Central. OG gets its first win of the year in AAA.
That was a big win for them. And then Gabe Stern of Brookings. You can pick a defensive player on Brookings almost every week. Well, last week, the defensive lineman came up with the pick 6. Back in coverage. I love the way they mix things up on defense. Back in coverage, had his zone out in the flat, and took it back for 6 to seal the win in that game. He also had a forced fumble and 7.5 tackles. So welcome to the club, Gabe Stern. You're another game changer on that Brookings defense.
And the Bobcats are the only 11AA team that's still undefeated right now at 4-0, which is pretty remarkable. But who ultimately is going to get your game 1 game ball?
So obviously one of the factors is who are you playing against? And when you're playing the number 2 team in the class and you dominate the way that Sioux Falls Christian did, I'm going to name a couple of players for them. Their quarterback, Lincoln Prince, did a great job throwing the ball, only 1 incomplete pass on the game, and he found his cousin, Cole Snyder, several times throughout the game. There he is. Go get him in the end zone, and Snyder also had a huge game, not only offensively but defensively, and he's been doing that for years for Sioux Falls Christian, making plays on both sides of the ball. But those two together absolutely smashed, and Lincoln Prince, by the way, only played the first half of the game to put up those numbers.
You mentioned only the 1 incompletion for Prince, and then you look at Snyder's stat line. You see the offensive and defensive numbers. 212 through the air, 3 touchdowns, a pick, a fumble recovery, a forced fumble, 6 tackles. These two were instrumental in Sioux Falls Christian rising up last season. Now they look to rise even higher, and those two are doing it on both ends.
Yeah, and Lincoln, of course, was injured toward the very end of last year. And this year, the two cousins, along with their other cousin, Canyon Prince, are really the central part of the skill positions on this team. But they've got so much more than the skill position. Strong, like you said, line on both sides of the ball, complete defense, complete receivers, complete running backs. I mean, it's really a solid team.
And it was a solid victory over Canton, and it was homecoming for them. So not only are you facing one of your biggest rivals in a 1-2 matchup, but homecoming, for as cliche as it is during the week, that can be a distractor, and they were locked in.
Yeah, and exactly. Like, you never know what to expect from the kids. Everybody wants to win, but there are a ton of distractions throughout the week. They stayed focused, got the win, proved they are the number 1 team in 11A.
All right, Lincoln Prince, Cole Snyder are your Game 1 game ball winners for this week. We'll be back after this message from our friends at Game 1. Thanks again to our friends at Game 1 for that. A lot of great stuff going on this week. And, of course, now is the time for The Real Deal, your weekly interview with 605 Sports' Ryan Deal. He's writing a lot of excellent features online and a lot of great games coming up this week that he's previewing with you.
Exactly. He always takes a look at one of his favorite 11-man games, 9-man games. He talks about what he saw last week in person. Last week he checked out Howard in Canastota, and then whatever features he's working on, and he'll wrap it all up with you right here. Ryan, last week you went out to see the Howard Tigers take on Canastota, 2 brand-name football teams. What were your impressions of those teams in that game?
Came away very impressed with Howard. You know what you're going to get with Howard. Run the ball a little bit more. And then obviously they're just going to play sound defense. Kind of anticipated a little bit better of a game. In recent years, those 2 teams have met, and it just kind of a lot of times gone down to the wire. Some great battles through the years. 32-0, Howard won that one. So really impressed with Howard. I knew going into the game that obviously Howard was kind of separated themselves as one of the top teams in 9A, and certainly came away impressed with those guys. And when you talk about 9A this year, Howard will certainly be in the mix. So definitely impressed with the Tigers.
The Howard Tigers rolling as usual. And this year, for the first time in a while, Pierre hasn't been rolling like usual. Let's highlight your 11-man game to watch. You want to focus on Yankton at Pierre. What are your thoughts on that one, Ryan?
Yeah, it's interesting. Pierre's been on this great run the last 7 years or whatever it is. It's winning all these state championships in 11 AA. First time since 2017, I believe, that they've lost back-to-back games. So this goes to show, it's nothing new. We all know what Pierre's capable of and what they've done the last few years. But now they've lost a couple games in a row. So it'll be interesting to see how those guys respond. But they're still ranked. So it'll be a ranked matchup facing Yankton. Yankton probably hasn't beaten Pierre in a while. So I'm sure they're kind of chomping at the bit to face those guys. So it's certainly going to be interesting to see, how Pierre responds to facing some adversity. But, Coach Steele, he knows what he's doing up there with Pierre. So I anticipate they'll rebound. But obviously, it's going to be a tough matchup facing the Bucks and everything.
Well, in 9-man football, it looks like the premier matchup of the week takes us to 9B, where we find Falkton coming off of a couple of losses, taking on undefeated Sully Buttes. What do we know about this game, and what are you looking forward to?
Kind of interesting, Falkton and Pierre. Falkton's taken a couple losses here, losing to Warner and Leola Frederick a couple games in a row. So kind of similar to Pierre in Falkton's case. Be interesting to see how those guys respond to facing a little bit of some adversity, because they've made the Dome last year as well. So they've, tasted some success. But it'll be a good test for them facing Sully Buttes, and likewise the Sully Buttes facing Falkton. So this will be a good kind of a barometer for both those teams to kind of see where they're at. And 9B, like we talk about all the time, it's kind of Avon and feels like kind of everybody else right now. So this will be a good test for both of those teams to kind of see where they stack up in 9B.
And in 9B, other than like Avon, like you said, it feels like we're waiting for a team to make that step up, and the winner of this game could get some momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of look at seed points. I know that's something as we get closer towards the end of the season, the seed points will obviously loom large with home field advantage and all that kind of stuff. So you definitely feel like whoever wins this game will do themselves a big favor by jumping up in some of the power points and all that kind of stuff. So certainly one to keep an eye on there in Oneida.
You've taken a good look at a lot of different athletes, especially in football on 605 Sports. What are you working on this week? Any athletes or teams that you've got your eye on?
Yeah, absolutely. Moshe Richmond, Woolsey Wessington. Let's call him an athlete, because he plays football, he plays basketball, and he does some track. So he does a little bit of everything for the Warbirds. So we're going to be doing a profile on him. And it was kind of fun. I talked to Hayden Hooks earlier today, and he said that obviously he can do a lot of things on the field. But what he said was really impressive this year is his leadership and just encouraging, the underclassmen to kind of step it up, so to say. So he said that's something that they kind of had to push him to do a little bit in recent years to kind of, hey, be more of a kind of a leader and a vocal leader and everything. So really cool to hear Hayden talk about Moshe and how he's kind of made that jump from, really being kind of maybe a quiet type of person in recent years, but now he's kind of being more of a leader. And then obviously the things he can do on the field, people see the highlights, 6'3", plays a wide receiver, plays some safety, does some running back, plays some quarterback. So certainly a 9-man football, whenever you got an athlete like that, you want to move him around and kind of a chess piece, so to say. And that's certainly the case with Moshe Richmond.
Well, we'll be watching for that feature coming out soon on 605 Sports. As always, thank you for your time, Ryan.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, Jason.
All right, thank you, Mr. Deal, and thank you, Jandy. Yeah, Moshe doing pretty well for Woolsey Wessington, still undefeated in 9A at 4-0.
There's a lot of players across the state right now that probably are getting under-recruited. I think he's probably one of them. Ryan Deal's going to do a story on him that'll be on 605 Sports very soon, if not already. And I'd be interested to see if that's heating up a little bit for him.
Absolutely. Big win for them over Platte Geddes last week in 9A. But, of course, now it is time to spin the wheel of justice, the wheel of football justice in, as I said, its 4th different place in 6 weeks. You do the honors now. What are we doing? Ooh, 9B. There's a surprise. We haven't started with 9B ever.
Are we going this way now?
I think we'll just go from the bottom up. Yeah, we'll go 9B all the way to 11A. So we'll start from the bottom, and then we'll end up here, there, anywhere whatsoever. So 9B.
Started at the bottom, now we're here.
Started at the bottom, now we are here with Class 9B. Not a ton to go over in 9B specifically. Avon was all over Cologne, 72-6. Probably the biggest thing was the Del Rapids St. Mary game over Centerville, a class above them in that shootout. We had mentioned the Cardinal defense for most of the first 4 weeks, but they proved that they got plenty of offense and can play in a game like this.
Well, and that's been almost every game with Centerville. It's been a shootout. They've been able to put big points on the board, but their pass defense has not been very good. So for Del Rapids St. Mary to show that they can play in a game like that, I think is beneficial because they've played in so many low-scoring games to start the season. I think they're a legit undefeated team right now, but I still think there's a gap between them and the rest of the class, or, Avon specifically.
Yeah, Avon and Del Rapids St. Mary's both undefeated at 5-0 right now. DRSM has Iroquois Lake Preston this week. Avon is off this week, so they get a chance to rest after their blowout win over Cologne. Sully Buttes and Falkton are going to be very interesting. Sully Buttes had the win over Potter County. Falkton lost to Leola Frederick, which is in 9AA, but that's still a good win for Leola Frederick and not a terrible loss for Falkton.
Right. Falkton with a couple losses now to Warner and Leola Frederick, two undefeated teams in classes above them.
Yep.
They're going to have a huge test this week, as they face Sully Buttes. And I think Falkton still belongs among those top 4 teams right now. And there's a lot of teams that have a chance to make it into that Final Four, and that's kind of what I've got my eye on with 9B because it does feel like Avon's, if they don't get hurt, is better than everybody else. But who has a chance to make it to the semifinals or further?
And Canastota stays at number 5 even after getting shut out by Howard, who's number 1 in 9A. But Canastota has just played a weird schedule. They've had to mix in some new pieces, but don't count out Canastota toward the end of the season.
And that's a team, it's still a big question mark. Even after all these weeks, we still don't quite know what the Canastota Hawks are. I think they're ranked about right, 5, 6, 7, right in that area is probably where they belong, but that doesn't mean if they get into a matchup in the playoffs that they can't knock somebody off.
All right, before we get to our Week 5 games to watch, this is the first of your 7 second-half risers. So you specifically tried to choose teams as best you could that were outside the top 5. So in 9B, who is your riser for the second half?
Especially in seeding outside that top 5. And I went with Coleman Egan. This is a team that has had some rough luck to start the season. Lost to Avon early in the year. They lost a couple of really close games, but I think they're a team that if they can eliminate mental mistakes, and their head coach Chad Williamson said that if we eliminate mental errors, we can play with all these teams. They were ahead of Avon, the only team that's been ahead of Avon this year before they gave up a couple of big kick return touchdowns. So I think this is a team that really shows the potential to get better in the second half if they can get straight and not make the penalties and not make the formation issues and give up the big plays like they have so far in the first half of the season.
Yeah, Week 1 or Week 0, whatever you want to call it, it was a 60-38 loss to Avon. But as you said, they were winning that game at one point. And then you mentioned their 2 other close losses. They lost to Del Rapids St. Mary 16-6, and Del Rapids St. Mary still undefeated, as we mentioned, and lost 12-6 to Canastota, hovering around the bottom of that 9B class. Remember, Canastota and Coleman Egan new to 9B this year as well.
Right, and those 2 are respectable losses. I think Coleman Egan has a chance to be able to move the ball offensively, passing-wise, better than a lot of teams in 9B. So if the weather stays decent, they cut down on the mental mistakes, this is a team that's going to be much higher and possibly ranked or even in that Final Four discussion as we get closer to the end of the season.
Coleman Egan did get their first win last week, 60-6 over Sioux Falls Lutheran. As far as the games to watch for next week, you mentioned it. The only top 5 matchup, or the only matchup between 2 top 5 teams in the same class in 9-man, number 4 Falkton at number 3 Sully Buttes.
And for Sully Buttes, this is a huge chance for them to really get noticed as an undefeated team. Their running back, Gavin Barber, sounds like he's not going to be 100%. I haven't heard if he's going to play or not yet in that game, but that would be huge if he's not able to go because Falkton area has some load to take down in the backfield. So if they are not at full strength, it's going to be a tough game for Sully Buttes. If they are, this is a team that has found ways to move the ball down the field, and it'll be interesting to see how they square off after Falkton's coming off of those couple losses.
Yeah, the couple losses, as you mentioned, 2 teams and classes above them. So Falkton, who was in the 9B championship last season, sitting at 2-2, but a tough test having to go on the road at Sully Buttes. We mentioned Avon is off this week. Del Rapids St. Mary is at Iroquois Lake Preston, and then Canastota is hosting Sioux Falls Lutheran. So that 4-3 matchup, Falkton Sully Buttes, easily the best one in 9B this week.
In all of 9-man, I think, and that's the one that Ryan Deal talked about. I think we're going to have our eyes on that one as well, and it's going to be huge for either team to get a victory in this game.
All right, like the Jeffersons, let's move on up to 9A. And we mentioned it a little bit ago with 9A, Howard defeating Canastota 32-0. Wolsey Wessington over Platte Geddes 36-14. Both those teams remain undefeated. Harding County Bison over Lemon McIntosh 46-14. The 2 and 3 teams, Wall and Warner, were both off last week. Anything in particular stand out to you about the 9A results from last week?
Not huge, other than Howard, like you said, didn't have an issue at all with Canastota, and I thought maybe they would be challenged a little bit in that game. And Wolsey Wessington, another team that continues to really cruise by, beat a good Platte Geddes team, and really had no problem with them either. So another good win for them.
And then Howard is off this week. Again, Howard and Avon, the 2 number 1 teams in 9A and 9B, are both idle this week. Wall is going to be at Stanley County in at 9AA. That's certainly going to be interesting. But as far as looking outside the top 5, who is your second half riser in Class 9A?
Well, I'm looking at you, Alcester Hudson, and the reason I'm looking at you is after a 2 and 3 start, most teams kind of get pushed aside, but I think you guys have the potential to really make a strong second half, partly because Jose Lopez, one of their big running backs, has played with a high ankle sprain most of the season, so they can just continue to get better as he continues to get better. But the pass defense is really an issue for this team, and defensively in general, they've got to get better. But offensively, they can play with anybody. Last week against Freiburg Hurley Freiburg Hurley 2 weeks ago went well. Last week didn't go so well against Freeman Marion Academy, but their second half schedule lightens up a little bit, and all those tough teams that they played early on is really going to help them and benefit them in the second half of the season.
Yeah, Alcester Hudson has been a real Jekyll and Hyde team. They have alternated between offensive explosions. They put up 70 in a game earlier this season, and in their losses, they've been held under 10 points. You mentioned the loss to Freeman Marion Academy, the loss to Howard earlier this season. So which Alcester Hudson team is going to show up in the second half?
And what I like about this team is even if they have injuries, which they've had sustained a couple of big ones as well as Jose Lopez, but they've got Tommy Walth and Evan Brown and Darren Dykstra, a lot of different guys who can carry the ball. And Ethan Beauville has not only led their team in receiving, but he's been their best tackler on defense. So they've got a lot of different players who can get it done. They don't rely on one player. And that's another reason I think they have the potential to make a big second half push.
As I mentioned, Howard is off this week. Wall at Stanley County playing another team in a class above them. That's going to be very interesting for Wall, who's coming off a bye week.
Yeah, and I think Wall needs another test. They've had what they thought were going to be some tests early in the year, but have passed those with flying colors. So they're going to need to continue to get tested as they come down the stretch so they can ensure that they'll be one of those teams left standing in November.
Warner is at Northwestern. Gregory is at Wolsey Wessington. That's another thing. Gregory's kind of always been in that discussion between classes as they've alternated between AA and A for the past couple of years. But that's a Gregory team that can surprise some people.
Yeah, they've had a few games where you kind of have to recognize that, these guys have some potential. But then they've had some games where they have not shown up, and they are not a top 5 team this year for sure, but they can play at that level where they can compete with a lot of different teams.
Harding County Bison is at Timber Lake, and then Alcester Hudson, they are hosting Gayville-Vollen. You mentioned a couple of Gayville-Vollen's top performers, so that could be a shootout type scenario as well.
Gayville-Vollen's had a couple of good wins early in the season. They've got some potential. It's going to be a big test for Alcester Hudson, but if Gayville-Vollen wants to get back in the race, that'd be a great place to start.
All right, there's 9A. Moving on up to 9AA. I like the wheel placement this week. I gotta admit.
It's easier for us to see.
It's easier for us to see. It's easier for Chad Berger to follow along, which is the most important thing.
It's great.
It's fantastic. 9AA. We mentioned Howard and Avon are going to be off this week. The number 1 teams in 9A and B. Parkston, the number 1 team in 9AA, was off last week. Hamlin blew out Florence Henry. Elkton Lake Benton blew out Great Plains Lutheran. Viborg Hurley, TDA, ACDC were all off last week. Anything stick out in particular to you about what happened in 9AA?
There weren't a lot of final scores that surprised me at all, I would say. Mm-hmm. But just the fact that we've got so many contenders in this class, including now you see Leola Frederick getting a couple votes, getting into that rotation of teams at the top. I think there's a lot of teams that have a chance to go on a second half push. And Leola Frederick, still undefeated. good win against a good Faulkton area team. So I guess I'm going to have to give them a little shout out.
Parkston still undefeated, obviously. Hamlin undefeated. Elkton Lake Benton undefeated. TDA ACDC undefeated. You mentioned Leola Frederick. There's a lot to sort out in 9AA. But when you look at the polls, you're seeing some teams receiving votes. I have a suspicion one of those teams receiving votes might be your second half riser in 9AA.
My second half riser is Kimball White Lake, and you'd say, well, they're 4-1. How much further can they go? They've only lost to Parkson. Well, they're only the 9th seed right now in 9AA because of all those teams we talked about that are having success in 9AA. So my rise is to see them get into that top 8 and maybe even make a stronger push to get 1 or maybe 2 home games in the playoffs. And the reason I like this team so much is the big question mark on this team coming into the season was the offensive line. Well, they have proved that not an issue. 290 yards rushing per game, and then their defense has been really stout as well. They've basically pitched 4 shutouts this year. They did play that Parkson game where they didn't get a shutout, and then they gave 1 touchdown up late that prevented them from getting that extra shutout.
Sure.
But they've really been strong defensively and running them. So this is a team that will control the clock. They can compete with anybody in this class. And that Parkson game was close, but not close enough.
Right.
But by this second half of the season, they're going to be able to play with those type of teams. Trust me, this Wildcats team, they've got some tread left in them.
Well, you mentioned the offensive line. It helps when they have a stud behind them running who's been one of your top performers the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, Aiden Myers is, probably averaging most of those 290 yards rushing per week. But I really think this is a team that doesn't care about the rankings right now. They know they belong as one of those top teams in 9AA, and they're playing like it right now.
Absolutely they are. And you mentioned the one loss to Parkston was 26-0. Probably one of the closer games, weirdly enough, that Parkston has played this season.
Yeah, exactly. They just couldn't get things going offensively. But I think as their offensive line has improved, this is a team that could challenge a team like Parkston. So I know we're talking about Hamlin and we talk about Parkston and Elkton Lake Benton as teams that are undefeated, really tough to beat. But there's some teams outside there, Kimball White Lake being one of them, that could maybe crack in that door.
No one in the top 5 in 9AA is facing a ranked opponent this week. Parkston is at Bonham. Hamlin is hosting Redfield. Elkton Lake Benton, they are off this week. Viborg Hurley is hosting Garrettson. And then TDA ACDC is hosting Burke. So probably not going to be a lot of changes in the 9AA poll when we're here next Wednesday.
I don't think so. I think there's a couple. I looked down the schedule in the future a week or two, and we're going to have some really good matchups coming up. But yeah, this week doesn't look like there'll be a lot of change.
All right, done with 9-man. Moving on up to the 11-man ranks and Class 11B. And the big one this week was Winter over Woonsocket Wessington Spring Sanborn Central, 30-18. We talk about Winter a lot, but Woonsocket Wessington Spring Sanborn Central, they had some good numbers in this game in a 30-18 loss.
Yeah, I mean, this is a game where Winter put some pressure on Holden Havlick, and he was still able to throw for nearly, or maybe even 296, nearly 300 yards in the game. And especially in the second half when they had to play catch up, he gave him a chance to catch up. And Ryder Mahalik came down with some huge catches in that second half, even though he was double teamed a lot of that second half. So yes, a loss for Woonsocket Wessington Spring Sanborn Central, but a very respectable one. And then Winter, yeah, you got to keep talking about him because they continue to do it. Sean Hammerbeck came and played a possession on offense before getting an injury to his hand, and now he will probably stay out until the playoffs, more than likely. So we'll keep an eye on that. But honestly, Winter's been doing it without Sean, and they'll just be frosting on the cake when he does come back. So I think it's all positive right now for the Warriors.
Absolutely. If they can win without arguably one of their best, if not their best player, the future Cornhusker, it's something to be said just about the team that they've built in Winter over these years, that they can survive an injury like that, but also to know not just survive, but thrive. These guys aren't just, holding on to the fort or, being game managers until Sean comes back. This is a legit team that can win with or without him.
Yeah, they've made some smart changes on the defensive side of the ball, not just personnel-wise, but system-wise to take advantage of the guys that they do have in there, and they've done a really good job. They put a lot of pressure on Holden Havlick last week, and I think they can do that against any team.
Sioux Valley, the number 2 team, over Sisseton 56-12. Elk Point Jefferson over Baltic 46-14. Again, no big surprises there with Sioux Valley and with EPJ. Mount Vernon Plankinton, they were off last week. They stay at that number 5 spot at 3-1. So when you look at a second half riser in 11B, who do you were choosing between a couple teams, but you settled on one in 11B.
Well, you look at 11B, no others receiving votes. So you've got these 5 teams in those 9-man classes. We're talking about 6, 7, 8, 10 contenders.
Right.
This one, you kind of just talk about these 5 teams, but I'm going to throw another team in there. I was trying to decide between Roncalli and Clark Willow Lake, and I think the Clark Willow Lake team probably has more potential in the second half to make a push. Right now, the 8 seed, they're 3-1 on the season. They're a team that starts 10 juniors, 2 sophomores, and only 3 seniors. And you don't see that very much on these small teams where you only start 3 seniors. That gives them the potential, I think, to continue to get better and better. They've got a junior quarterback in Emerson Larson who's had a fantastic year. They can move it through the air. Elliot Bratlin's been moving it on the ground. I think this is a team that's continually going to get better and better. And they're playing a fairly tough schedule. They're the only team that really put up more than 2 touchdowns on Sioux Valley so far this year.
36 on them.
A lot of those I know were junk time.
True.
At the end of the game, but they did. They showed on paper that they can move the ball against a good defense. So, I mean, I think Clark Willow Lake might be a dark horse. I don't know about making the Final Four, but they wouldn't surprise me if they pushed a team in that top 4.
And probably the other thing with Clark Willow Lake is they can play any type of game. You mentioned the Sioux Valley game. Yeah, a lot of those points were garbage time. It was a 56-36 final. But they also had a very infamous 2-0 win over Aberdeen Roncalli. Yes, a 2-0 win on a safety earlier this season.
The very first game of the year, I had to do a double take. You and I both had to make sure it wasn't a forfeit. It was not a forfeit.
It was a 2-0 game.
It was a 2-0 game with a safety, a legit defensive safety in that game. But it shows you what kind of defense they can play. And Roncalli, I mean, we didn't talk about them, but they're a team with Aiden Fisher at quarterback who can run and pass it a little bit, who could continually get better throughout this season too. So those are 2 teams in the northeast part of the state I would keep an eye on.
When you look at games to watch this week, probably the one that's of most importance, that might be the most competitive, Woonsocket, West Indian Springs, Sanborn Central, they're going to be at Wagner, a team that's been receiving votes in past polls, stuck in, I believe, at number 5 at one point or another. That's probably going to be the most competitive game this week.
And Wagner has a chance. They've got, 3 losses so far in the year to kind of get a mark on the win column, a really important mark. And another one I'm looking at, we just talked about Clark Willow Lake, but they take on Groton. Those are 2 3-1 teams. And Groton still has Roncalli on the schedule too. So Groton, if they play their cards right, could come up and have a nice little second half of their season too.
Most of the rest of the top 5 not playing anyone of consequence. Winners hosting Miller Highmore Herald. Sioux Valley's at Dual. Beersford is at number 3. Elk Point Jefferson. Mount Vernon Plankinton taking on Chamberlain at home. That should be an interesting matchup as well.
Yeah, I think Mount Vernon Plankinton, after the bye, getting back and getting a game against Chamberlain, they should get the win in that one. But yeah, always good to see what you've got as far as a test against a team like the Cubs.
Alrighty, 11A. So we discussed the Sioux Falls Christian side of it. Let's get to the Canton side, because we can admit Canton was not at full strength. Down T. Granum, they had to rely on Kane Wallner a lot in the running game. Wallner's a fantastic back, but he's always kind of been part of a tandem of great Seahawk running backs, and it just seemed like once Sioux Falls Christian put up those early points on them, it just became really hard to dig out of that hole.
Well, it really does show how much depth matters, especially when you start getting up to 11A. Sioux Falls Christian has so many good players. Canton, you take a couple of key pieces out of that team. They're not a real veteran team beyond some of those guys at the top. They can falter a little quicker than some of those other teams. So Canton, I still think, is a good team. I think they're about right at number 3. But Sioux Falls Christian, to me, finally getting all those 20 first-place votes, they are definitely the class of this class.
49-7 was that final between the top 2 teams at the time, Sioux Falls Christian and Canton. Lennox, number 3 at the time, over West Central in a closer game than maybe we thought initially, 40-28.
It definitely started out close, but the field position game was won by Lennox most of the game. And at the last part of the game, Lennox was able to not only throw the ball with Boston Catcher, but I like that they can also chew up some clock when they have Tate Gertis going, and they were able to show both those off, especially in the second half of that game.
Dakota Valley over Tri-Valley, a team that had been receiving votes in past polls, 21-14. Good win for Dakota Valley there.
Yeah, that was a comeback win for them. Second comeback win this year for Dakota Valley.
And Del Rapids at number 5 over Millbank, 42-7. So not a ton of changes in the bottom of the poll, but obviously Lennox and Canton flip-flop. And as you said, you go back and check the tape first show, you said Sioux Falls Christian and Lennox, in your mind, were the top 2 teams in this class. Midway through the season, the polls bear that out.
They do, and I still believe kind of the same thing I did at the beginning of the year, that Lennox's top-end game and Sioux Falls Christian's top-end game are not that far apart. Sioux Falls Christian's just much more consistent right now. If Lennox can get that consistency, I mean, I think they can play right with them.
Who is your second half riser in Class 11A?
Well, it's the Rapid City Christian Comets. This team has found out one thing, that they can play skill-wise with anybody in this class. Now, when it comes to their line and their depth, they probably came up a little bit short against some of those top teams that they played to start the season out. But Benson Kiefer, Lars Kiefer, Wes Schlebach, all these guys have done a great job of receiving the ball from Simon Kiefer, and they have a lot of potential. So can they keep that passing game going as the temperatures drop? I think they can. This is a team that has a much easier second half schedule, and you'll see that 1-3 record shoot up to maybe 5-3 or 6-3, depending on how things go toward the end of the year. They've got chances against Hot Springs, Lakota Tech, Lee Deadwood, Custer, and Belle Fourche. I think they go on a roll and maybe get to 6-3 before they hit the playoffs.
Remember, they started 0-3, but they were facing 3 of the top 5 teams in this class to begin the season, and they kept it close against Canton week 1.
They did. They kept it close against Canton. They got into trouble against Sioux Falls Christian in the Del Rapids game. Things just did not go well from the beginning, and they got off the rails. But you talked to Matt McIntosh, and he said, I'm glad we played those 3 teams, because more than likely we're going to play one of those 3 teams again when the seedings come out in late October. And to have that experience against those guys is going to be a huge advantage the second time around for the Comets.
They did get their first win this past week against Chamberlain, 46-6. So again, you look at that 1-3 record, but also look at the quality of opponents they faced, and to be frank, the quality of opponents they're going to face down the stretch. You listed the rest of their schedule. They have a chance to go on a run.
They do. I really think the key for them is last year Braylon Marshall was able to run the ball for them. They haven't been able to run quite as much this year because they've been behind. But if they can get Braylon Marshall going again on that ground game, I think they are able to play with those top teams in 11A.
As far as games to look forward to this week, big top 5 matchup, number 4 Dakota Valley at number 2 Lennox. This is a Dakota Valley team, as you mentioned, that's had a couple of come-from-behind victories, and now you have a Lennox team that played well with Sioux Falls Christian. They were winning that first half before losing the second half against them a couple weeks ago. Bounced back, had a good win against West Central. I'm very intrigued to see how this one goes, especially since Lennox has started to rise to where you thought they would be.
Yeah, I think Lennox it could be really good, but they also can play down to their competition, and they've shown that over the last couple of years. Wouldn't shock me at all if Dakota Valley makes this a close game, and Dakota Valley will like to try to slow this game down, and if they can get some offense, they should be able to stay in this game. But Lennox is a better team, but we'll see if they can play to that level.
Madison is at number 1 Sioux Falls Christian this week. Del Rapids is at Tri-Valley. That's a good kind of bottom of the polls type of matchup between number 5 DR and Tri-Valley, the only other team receiving votes in 11A.
Yeah, and Tri-Valley needs a signature win. They've started out with some wins against some lesser opponents, but they need a signature win if they want to be considered one of those top teams in 11A. This win would qualify as that, and I think they have the potential to do that, but we haven't seen it yet.
And then Canton is at West Central. We saw West Central hang with Lennox for a little bit on Friday, but Canton West Central games have always been competitive.
And this one, to me, these are very similar teams. When I watch them on tape, they play very similarly too. Just the way that they run out of their power offenses, but have a chance to go downfield from time to time too. So we'll see if Canton needs to get back on track, and this would be a good place to get it started against West Central. But West Central is going to give them some problems.
Moving on up to arguably the funnest class, 11AA.
Let's go.
We discussed a lot of it already. Let's hone in on Aberdeen Central over Spearfish, because Spearfish obviously kind of took the reins a little bit week 1 when they got that victory over T, snuck into the top 5, solidified itself at 3. And then Aberdeen Central, which had played Pier close earlier this season, which had other close games earlier this season, a 1-point loss to Brookings. Aberdeen Central gets its first win of the year over a number 3 team in Spearfish. That just goes to show you the parity at this level.
Well, the key to beating Spearfish is to limit the big plays, and that's what Aberdeen Central has done so well this year. They've limited big plays when they played Pier. They limited big plays against Brookings. They limited those big plays once again against Spearfish, and they were balanced. Aberdeen Central was balanced offensively, defensively. It came down to a few short or small plays, short fields. One was a big block punt for Aberdeen Central, which got them into scoring position early in the game, and that meant so much momentum-wise in that game. So Aberdeen Central, yeah, they can play with Spearfish, but Spearfish isn't done. They'll still make some big plays. They're still one of the fastest overall team speed teams in the entire class.
Golden Eagles also had a couple of key interceptions there in that game, a 14-6 game. With all the stuff going on, we kind of skimmed by it, but Watertown, no issue with Mitchell, 47-14. To me, that's just a sign of, all right, you've ascended to this number 1 spot. Take care of the teams you're supposed to take care of, and they did.
They were clean. They were much cleaner than they have been the rest of the season. Although in this game, in the first quarter, they didn't jump on them. Watertown did not jump on Mitchell, but then they did command the game after that. But they played much cleaner, and that's bad news for the rest of 11AA because they have made a lot of mental errors in their first 4 games, even though they're still the number 1 team in the class.
Yankton, they had their AAA game. They fell to number 1 Harrisburg, 49-14. Yankton's 2-2. Both their wins have been blowout fashion over a couple of the lesser teams in 11AA. We're going to talk about their matchup later this week, but Yankton's just kind of an interesting team that fits into this picture. And then for T, I voted T number 5. That's why they have so many receiving votes. I put them at number 5. Brenner Conrad, unfortunately, probably going to miss the rest of the season with a knee injury, so they got to figure out a new quarterback. They got a big win over Douglas. But as far as the Titans figuring it out, they had the early setback losing the Spearfish, have rallied now, but now they got to figure out who's going to be the main guy on offense.
Yeah, and Dashiell Lowry came in there and played quarterback. He played an all right game. He didn't throw any interceptions or have that many incompletions in the game, but they only threw it less than 10 times, I know. So McKinney did a good job keeping it on the ground. They just pretty much kept that game on the ground, kept it safe, got the win. We'll see the new addition of this T area team coming up here down the stretch to see if they can maybe make a push back into that top 5.
And speaking of making a push back, who's your second half riser in this class? You have some choices here.
I had a lot of different choices, but I'm going with Aberdeen Central. This is that 1-3 team that beat Spearfish, played with Pier,
played with Brookings,
exactly. Like they could easily be a 3-1 team right now, but they're sitting there at 1-3. Now you look at their schedule. It's going to be tough because after Sturgis and Mitchell and Huron, they end the season with Lincoln and Watertown. So they'll definitely rise over the next 3 weeks. How will that prepare them for those last 2 games against Lincoln and Watertown? That's where the rubber meets the road for this team. And I think they've got the weapons offensively. They just have not clicked quite yet. They've got a couple of receivers who have done a nice job of making a couple big plays, but they haven't been consistent. I'd like to see them get a little more consistent offensively. Defensively, I love what Aberdeen Central has brought to the field this year.
I mentioned kind of not necessarily the close circle about all the teams beating up on each other in 11AA. Here's one I actually can complete. So Aberdeen Central beat Spearfish this past week, 14-6. Of course, Spearfish beat T 39-29 week 1. And then Aberdeen Central's worst loss of the season was to T 39-7. So there's your 3-team, everyone beating up on each other.
Yeah, and that one didn't really make sense other than it just got away from them early, but they feel like they're a little closer to that team. But I think second half, we're going to see them go on this 3-game winning streak, and then we'll see how they finish in those last 2 games.
The big game in 11AA, number 4 Yankton, number 3 Pier. Both these teams are 2-2. And for what was the state championship matchup last season, one of these teams is going to be below 500 next week.
Yeah, and imagine that we saw Pier get off to that 2-0 start, and you asked me, do you think they're still a championship contender? I said yes. I'm starting to doubt myself a little bit because
we said last week they're still the team to beat, and now I'm starting to doubt that after the loss to Brookings.
Just because they have not improved running the football, and you got to be able to run the football down the stretch. I don't know if you can fix that or not in the middle of the season, because if it can be fixed, Steve Steele will fix it. Yeah. But the interceptions have really gone up in the last 2 weeks. That's something that has to change for Pier, and they've got to find success on the ground. Otherwise, Yankton's going to go in there and give them their third loss in a row.
That'll be a very interesting matchup. Watertown is at Douglas, Spearfish hosts Huron, Mitchell's at T, Aberdeen Central's at Sturgis. The AAA game, I mentioned it off the top, Brookings coming down to Sioux Falls at Howard Wood Field to play Sioux Falls Roosevelt. That's a game Brookings can win.
Yes, they can. Are they going to get all their points on defense, though?
Yeah.
I mean, Roosevelt's banged up a little bit, too, and they've got a lot of young players trying to make a name for themselves. I mean, talent-wise, I don't know. Brookings is probably a little better. They're going to struggle moving the ball, but Roosevelt will. But Brookings has got to find a way to get that running game going and get some points on the board with the offense. But, yes, they can win. And I think if there was a line on this game right now, I think it probably would be the favorites would be Brookings, but wouldn't be shocked to see a close one here.
That was for entertainment purposes only. Of course. You didn't give an actual line, but if you decided to possibly...
Who would be the favorite? Let's just put it that way.
Who would be the favorite? Absolutely. But a lot of interesting stuff happening in 11AA. And now we end with AAA. We'll see if the wheel stays the same. See, the new angle allows it to stay here.
Okay.
And maybe the Ask Jandy Anything we'll test the question mark here momentarily.
We're trying our best here, guys.
Absolutely. And we're succeeding, Jandy Pants. AAA, Harrisburg over Yankton, we mentioned that. The Lincoln-Jefferson game between number 2 and number 4, 28-16 Lincoln. Both teams played well. Lincoln had a fake punt in the second half that kind of swung the momentum a little bit. Jefferson had a couple chances in the red zone they just didn't capitalize on. But I just thought this was a lot closer game than 12 points indicated.
Yeah, watching it, you felt like Jefferson had a chance in the second half to really make this game interesting down the stretch. Lincoln didn't quite let him make it interesting, but they felt very even when you had either team with the ball. They both felt like they had a chance to push it down the field. So you mentioned it. Brody Schaefer's had a tremendous sophomore season, but he has probably had his worst game as a quarterback, which was still pretty darn good. And that's good news for Lincoln.
Yeah, Josh Myers obviously took care of the load on the ground, even with Schaefer only passing for 124 yards. Ethan Swenson, Ed Whiting, they were fantastic for Jefferson once again. I just have a feeling just the way AAA is shaking out, like there's a clear divide between the top 4 teams and the rest of the class. So these two very well could see each other again in late October.
I think you're probably right on that. I think we're going to see a lot more matchups like we saw this last week with top 4 teams playing against each other. Not this week,
right.
but coming down the stretch, we're going to see, the Lincoln, Harrisburg, Brandon Valley, Jefferson teams all playing against each other. It's going to help sort it out a little bit, but I think they're all going to give each other a loss.
Absolutely. Brandon Valley over Sioux Falls Roosevelt, 46-7. Big news though, Will Van Loor, sophomore backup, in place of the injury to Briggs Knutson, so the Lynx leaned on the running game. Viskerna Scott combined nearly 200 yards on the ground. It's a Brandon Valley team that still undefeated at 4-0 and just kind of finding ways to get things done.
Yeah, I think defensively they're still very stout. Hudson Parliament continues to just occupy the entire offensive line when he's playing defense. He's had multi-sack games. They're very deep on defense. I think they're going to really hang their hat on defense. And then offensively, we'll see. I haven't had a chance to talk to Matt Christensen to see what's up with Briggs Knutson, but hopefully he's able to drive that offense down the second half of the stretch.
We kind of mentioned that, the disparity between the top teams and kind of the lower tier teams. So a little tough probably to pick a second half riser in AAA, but who'd you go with?
I'm going with O'Gorman. I mean, you lose your first 3 games of the year to the top 3 teams in the class, and you lose, several players to injury, including Josh Wolfel, who had an ACL injury last year. He fought back and then had an ACL on the other knee early in this season. So they've had a lot of setbacks like that. They've played 3 different quarterbacks this year in Talon Black and Saysavan and Hermanson. And then Hermanson, their sophomore quarterback who took some snaps, he also broke his collarbone. So there's been a ton of setbacks in the first half of the season, but they did get the win last week at Rapid City Central. They are figuring some things out, and they are really relying on Sullivan Schlimgen and Alex Carlson on the defensive side to really stabilize things, because offensively, I mean, they were making plays. They had playmakers with Ryland Satter and Jones, Maverick Jones, and all those players on the outside. They just don't have those explosive players this year, but they are still finding a way to stay in some of these games. So got to give credit to the coaching staff. But it's going to be an uphill climb, but the schedule does lighten up.
Yep.
And they're going to have a chance to win some games. This week against Jefferson is going to be tough. But after that, they should be a team that gets back above 500.
Yeah, absolutely. The win, as you mentioned, over Rapid City Central. But the big matchup this week, as you said, with Jefferson, it's at O'Gorman, so at McEnany Field, Jefferson and OG. They've played some interesting games there the past couple of years.
They have, and Ethan Swenson has played there last year and has that experience back this year. Their running game is going to be good. I think Jefferson will keep it low to the vest and really run the ball down the field and try to gain ground on O'Gorman that way, and then hopefully they can find some defense to shut down what has been an unexplosive offense for O'Gorman. But it could be. You're right. It could be. O'Gorman always plays sneaky good at the MAC.
Brookings is at Roosevelt, as we mentioned. Harrisburg's at Rapid City Stevens. Washington faces Lincoln at Howard Wood Field. And then Rapid City Central comes to face Brandon Valley. So as you said, the 4-5 matchup between Jefferson and OG, the only top 5 matchup in 11 AAA. All right. Couple minutes to go. Let's ask you some questions. Okay, this was the panel. We'll see if it sticks to it. There you go. Partially on the question. Let's see. Oh, we got a good one. Chad Berger, yesterday, the 31-year anniversary of the movie The Program. What is the best football movie of all time?
I think I know yours, Dave. You want to do yours first?
Do you know mine? I'll have you guess mine.
Is it The Little Giants?
It is The Little Giants. Look at that.
I knew it had to be.
Little Giants, one of the most underrated, the mid-90s era of kids sports movies is honestly unparalleled. Little Giants.
That's Dave's favorite genre.
It is my favorite genre. You got Rick Moranis, you got Ed O'Neill in his Married with Children, pre-Modern Family height. Just fantastic, fantastic movie. It's an underdog movie. It's sweet. It's funny. It has heart. What more could you ask for?
Yeah, you gotta love it. How about? This is tough.
Could go Friday Night Lights.
I was thinking Friday Night Lights just because it's a high school movie. Yeah, let's go with Friday Night Lights.
Although to be fair, the TV show is better than the movie.
Probably.
The TV show Friday Night Lights is better than the movie. Let's see. We'll go to Chad's original thing. If you could have ice cream with any of your brownie points, what ice cream would it be?
I would say sea salt caramel.
Oh, that's a good one. I was going to go plain vanilla, but I like your idea better.
Yeah, you put a little caramel, a little sweet, a little salty with the brownie. Perfect.
All right, this one I'm not even going to attempt to answer. I'm just going to give it to you. Skull Vikings 97. Which 2015 9-man champions were the best 9-man team? 9AA Woolsey Wessington, 9A Canastota, or 9B Langford? This is from 9 years ago.
Yeah. Lincoln Gibbs obviously was a terror with Chance Olsen, I believe, at quarterback for Langford. That was a heck of a 9B team, like one of the best 9B teams I remember watching at the Dome. Woolsey Wessington, though, Hunter Johnson, I believe, was their leading rusher that year, or am I year off? Is that...
Well, he said Johnson. Hunter Johnson, the Warbirds break the record for rushing yards. Canastota continued their dominance of the 2010s. Yeah. Lincoln Gibbs broke Johnson's record. So
yeah, okay, that sounds right.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic year for all three of those teams. Woolsey Wessington, everybody thought they would kind of go down a year after they lost such talent the 2 years before that. I think they had a 2,000-yard rusher for 3 consecutive seasons, but. I really like that Woolsey Wessington team. That was really good. But I think Langford was the best 9B team for sure in that era.
All right. Favorite mascot in South Dakota high school football?
So many good ones. I guess it's going to have to be the Newell Irrigators.
I like that one.
I mean, you don't hear a lot about the Newell Irrigators, but go Gators.
I'll go Dubrook Dolphins just because I don't think dolphins are indigenous to South Dakota.
You know, everybody's going to bring up the Gregory Gorillas. I think that's one of the more unique ones. That's really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a ton of great names.
All right. Who would win a 40-yard dash, you or me? You. I can answer that one immediately. You would lap me in a 40-yard dash.
Would we get to 40 yards?
That's the other question.
That's the big question.
Among the South Dakota Sports Media members, this question, by the way, from Matt Kearney, a fellow South Dakota Sports Media member. Who would you like to see compete in a 40-yard dash? Didn't you do something with Midco a couple years ago, like you and Heinert, or am I imagining things?
Well, we did think about it because we did a lot of combine coverage, and I challenged Brian Henshin at the time to a 40. He wanted no part of me. So I agree. I mean, who would?
Well, I would say Mr. Track Alex Heiner.
Well, Alex Heiner. Yeah, we did do the race of the century. We did a
true.
4x1 relay, and Alex Heiner was on our anchor, and he blew away the competition. So
here's what I would like to see.
hammy.
I would like to see Alex Heiner race 100 yards against other people doing 40 yards and see who would win.
If we asked Alex right now, he probably would not do it though, because he would be afraid of pulling a hammy.
Oh, but still, he is Mr. Track.
Yeah.
All right, final one for Mr. DL. Favorite high school coach to interview?
Oh, yeah. This is easy. It's hopefully past or present, because Arlen Lickness was a tremendous interview every time. The old Yankton coach went to Beersford and now is at Hamlin as an assistant coach. He was a soundbite machine. He was great. So definitely Arlen Lickness.
I will say Steve Keeter, because it didn't matter the opponent. Whoever they were facing was the best team they're going to play all year.
That's probably true. I got one quick one here from Mark Ross. What team has the best offensive line in all, or it says lineman, but I'm going to say who has the best offensive line in all classes?
I'd probably say Brandon Valley still, just because they got
Brandon
Hudson Parliament and all those big guys up front.
Brandon Valley's pretty good. Actually, Jefferson's offensive line is better than people think. That's a really good offensive line. I know we're kind of looking, from some of the lower classes. You watch what Winter does; they just absolutely move people out of the way, and they've got the size, but not the same size they had back when they had like Crockett Krolikowski and some of those dudes. Like those lines could have been best of any class, but I'm gonna have to stick in AAA, and I think I have to go. Lincoln's line's pretty good too, but I think the Jefferson line has been better than advertised this year.
All right. Thank you again for your questions. We went over an hour this week. Lots of good stuff happening. Got second half risers. We got Ask Jandy Anything. New spot for the wheel. We got a theme song.
Just wait till next week.
We're like the A-team. I love it when a plan comes together. For Hannah Rowe, Bruce Andera, Jason Andera, I'm David Brown. We will see you next week for another edition of Inside the 605.